All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you guys all for coming. So we're just starting to do in-person classes again. Do you want a chair? I can grab you a chair. Would you like it? So I thank you guys all for coming. It's last year we didn't have very good attendance with our in-person classes, but this year it seems like everybody's out and about. So thank you guys for coming. So we've got a whole calendar of events going on this year. And we've got multiple classes on Orioles and Hummingbirds. We've been doing bluebird workshops. We even have a birding cruise on the Sand Patch boat that we're going to be doing this year. So we've got all kinds of fun things scheduled. But today we're talking about Orioles and Hummingbirds because it's that time of the year. They should be back any day now. And so I've prepared a little presentation about the Orioles and Hummingbirds we have here, how you can attract them to your backyard. If you have any questions afterwards or throughout, just let me know. But we'll get started here. So, let's see here. There we go. All right, so we are in migration season, which is really exciting. It really hits a peak for us around mid-May or so, but people are already starting to see warblers. We've gotten a few reports of people that have seen hummingbirds, actually. And a couple of people have said they've heard orioles. It's still a little bit early for the hummingbirds. They don't really start to come in until the first week of May or so. But this is the week where we really start to hear reports on orioles. So what I always like to do is look at this website, which is called Birdcast. And this is through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And what they do is they look at the weather patterns and things like that to predict what the migration is going to be. And you can see it says night of, it's a little blurry there, but it says night of April 25th or night of April 26th in the bottom left corner there, because a lot of these songbirds will migrate at night. They migrate overnight and then they'll hunker down once it starts getting light. They will look for places to perch and have some insects, eat a lot of food, and then they'll kind of sleep and rest throughout the day and then continue on their migration at night. So I like to look at this to see what the migration is going to look like or what the predicted migration is going to look like for the evening. So last night there wasn't anything too crazy, and this is for tonight, so this evening. And really the brighter yellow the map gets, that is the more migration, the more birds that are flowing through the area. So where you see the bright yellow, that is where there's a lot of migration happening. So you can see in Texas and down even in Florida, there's a lot happening. But in our area, tonight there'll be some things flowing in. Tomorrow night looks like it's going to be a little bit of a slower evening. But then going into the night of the 27th, we'll have more migration coming through the area here. So that looks like it's going to be a good night. So keep your eyes out and your ears out for the orioles, especially because they tend to flow in first before the hummingbirds do. So
is it accessible to everybody
online? Oh, yes. Yep. If you just look up Birdcast, you can find it right away. It might be, I think the website might be birdcast.info. I think. But yes, absolutely. You can find it. Yep. So we do have two different species of orioles that you can find here. The first is the Baltimore Oriole, and this is the most common oriole that you'll see in your backyard. The males are bright orange with the contrasting black, and then the females are more of a yellowish color, but they tend to get oranger over time. So sometimes they look quite yellow. Sometimes they look a little bit more orange. And this is just another picture of the Oriole in flight there. And this is their range. So you can see they're really an East Coast and middle of the country kind of bird. The orange is their breeding territory. So that is where they migrate up to, which includes here, to spend the spring and the summer. And then in the winter, they are down here in Florida, down in Cuba, Mexico, South America, Central America. So they make quite a long migration to come back up here every year. Now we also have another species that's called the orchard oriole. Not as common, but people sometimes do get them in their backyards coming to their Oriole feeders. So the females can be harder to distinguish the orchard Oriole female from the Baltimore Oriole female. It can be kind of difficult to tell, but the males are a much darker orange. So they're almost like a chestnut color orange instead of a bright orange like the Baltimore Oriole. So we do have these two species, but the orchard Oriole is not as common. And this is their range. So pretty similar to that of the Baltimore Oriole. And we're kind of in the tip of their northern range here. So, and then this is what the juvenile orchard Oriole looks like here. So they look quite a bit different. They almost look like a Bullock's Oriole here. So in general, this is our Baltimore Oriole here, and they are found in high, leafy, deciduous trees, but usually not deep in the forest. So you can usually find them what's called an edge habitat, kind of an open area. So open woodlands, forest edges, which is a pretty common habitat. And they'll forage for insects and fruits. They will often drink nectar from blooms. So if you have any trees that are in bloom or about to be in bloom, keep your ear out for the whistle of the orioles because they might be drinking from flowers. And they are common in backyards. And I do have their call. And usually I hear them before I see them. This is what they sound like.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's a really high-pitched whistle. You just might. Yeah, they are starting to come in. It's any day now. We'll start, once they really start coming in, it all happens on the same day. And we get so many phone calls. So we haven't had that day yet where we're getting all the phone calls. The Orioles are here. But it'll be here soon. And then in the spring and fall, they tend to eat a lot of nectar and ripe fruits. And then in the summer, when they're breeding and feeding their young, they'll eat a lot of insects. So what happens is when they're migrating through, a lot of people can easily get them in their backyard coming to nectar feeders. They eat oranges, they eat jelly. And then we found that they kind of drop off after a while, after 3-4 weeks or so. And it seems like it coincides directly with when they are in their nest, they're raising their young. But when they're doing that, their nestlings need a lot of insect material. So they need a lot of soft-bodied insects to feed their babies so those babies can grow and leave the nest quickly. And that's when they switch to eating a lot of mealworms. So what a lot of people do is if they have a feeder that has a couple cups in it that they used to have jelly in, they will switch that to mealworms to try to keep the Orioles coming all summer long. So that's one kind of tip to keep them coming. This is the Oriole nest. They're pretty cool looking. You might be able to see them pretty well right now that the leaves haven't come out on the trees. Yeah.
Can you put dried mealworms into the jelly?
I suppose you could. Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. You could kind of mash them all up together. Yeah, that would be okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, why not? So as far as the nesting goes, this is the nest that they make. They weave together a nest. And the female will choose the nesting site within a territory, and the male will defend that territory. So it's not uncommon to see Baltimore Orioles chasing after crows and chasing after blue jays and other birds, even hawks, seeing them going after hawks if they're getting too close to the nest. So she'll anchor the nest to a fork in the slender branch of a tree. Usually it's one that's kind of sticking out a little bit. And this hanging nest here will hang below a branch, but it's sometimes anchored along the vertical tree trunk. The female will weave this nest, and it's about 3 to 4 inches deep with a small opening that's about 2 to 3 inches wide. And it has this kind of larger chamber here that the young will be in. And that only takes about a week for her to weave that all together. So not too long at all.
And do they return to that nest yearly?
That's a really good question. They don't usually return to the same nest, but they often return to the same area. So that happens a lot with birds in general. They will return if they've had good luck with raising their young in one spot. They'll come back to that spot year after year. So sometimes when you hear about birds mating for life, they'll kind of disperse over the winter and then come back together in the spring, and it sounds very romantic, but it's really more of they call it nest site fidelity, where they've had really good luck in this spot and they just come back to the same spot year over year. So sometimes they'll nest in the same exact tree. Sometimes they'll nest in a tree nearby. So they usually don't reuse the exact same nest, but they'll be close. Usually, yeah.
Will anything else use their own nest?
Probably not for these, but some birds might tear some of the fibers apart to use them to build their own nest.
Are there other birds in the area that have those hanging nests? Because I had a hanging nest, and I'm not sure if it was an Oriole or if it's something else.
Not as large as this one. There are some other ones that have kind of smaller hanging nests, but not this big.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
are they territorial? I mean, can you have a couple of Orioles in your yard, small yard, or are they more territorial?
During nesting season, they're going to be more territorial. I'm not sure how big their territories are. Usually with some of these more common songbirds, they're about 1 or 2 acres large, wide. So you probably, depending on the size of your property, you probably won't have more than one nesting pair in your yard.
What's the life expectancy of these birds? You said they come back next year. Do you expect it more than 1 year to come back? Or?
They could, yeah. So it varies with songbirds, especially that if they survive that first year. The first year is really brutal. There's the odds of them surviving their first year is not very good at all. But then once they've survived that first year, usually they live anywhere between 3 and 6 years is a common lifespan for a songbird of this size. The larger they are, in general, the longer they live. So birds of prey tend to live quite a bit longer. So this whole nest building process only takes about a week. And right now you can sometimes see these nests in trees throughout the winter and things where you don't have the leaves. You can kind of see where they've
A particular
nested.
type of tree?
They like this they're not super picky, any kind of deciduous trees, really. So you can find them in oak trees, maple trees, anything like that. You won't find them in pine trees, but they do like that edge habitat. So you can easily find these nests if you're just, hiking, walking along trails, in parks. If you look up, you don't be surprised if you see some of these nests.
Yeah.
So when they are nesting, they have 1 brood per year. So they have 1 round of eggs per year. And the clutch size or the number of eggs is anywhere between 3 and 7. And in general, the more experienced, the older the female is, the more eggs she'll lay. So that's pretty common with songbirds. So the older she is, she tends to have more. And it can depend on the resources too. If the resources are kind of scarce, she tends to have less. The incubation time is only 11 to 14 days. So they sit on those eggs for a week and a half, 2 weeks. After that, those eggs hatch. And then the nestling period is, again, only about 11 to 14 days. So from going to just a little nestling like this, totally blind, no feathers, to out in the world, it's only about 11 to 14 days. So it takes hardly any time at all, which is pretty wild. And then this is another nest. This is the Orchard Oriole nest. They also weave a nest, but it's not as long. It's kind of shorter. So this is your Orchard Oriole nest. One of the best ways to attract orioles is with a feeder. You can't really entice them to nest somewhere, but you can entice them to come to your backyard with lots of food. And they are pretty easy to attract. People have really good luck with orioles, more so than the hummingbirds lately too. They will eat suet. There's orange flavored suet that they'll eat, especially early on in the season as they're coming back. They'll eat oranges, so orange halves. Nectar they will drink, and jelly is really what brings them in. If you can only feed one thing, jelly is the way to go. They love grape jelly. We sell something called birdberry jelly. It's a mix of grape and blackberry, and they love that. So when you're picking out your jelly, you want to make sure there's no artificial sweeteners or corn syrups, anything like that. You can tell if you go to the grocery store, you can absolutely tell when the Orioles have arrived, because every year the jelly section is completely wiped out. It happens every year. It's really funny. So it's like, yep, the Orioles are here. Yeah.
If they like oranges and jelly, what about marmalade?
Some people have had luck with marmalade. It doesn't seem to be their ultimate favorite, but if you were to put out grape jelly and marmalade, they'd probably go to the grape jelly first, but they will. I've heard that they will eat marmalade. And then mealworms, especially once they have those babies that they're feeding. They don't feed them a lot of hard-shelled insects like beetles and things like that. They need those really soft-bodied insects to feed their young. And that's why they eat so many mealworms. They eat a lot of caterpillars. So especially as they're in that nesting period, which usually happens early to mid-June, it seems, they start to kind of fizzle off in people's backyards. That's when mealworms are a good thing to change to if you want to. So here's some Orioles, male and female, here at a feeder. This is some orange suet. So they do eat this orange suet. And it seems like that's something that they like, especially early on when they're migrating and they're using a lot of calories to do those flights overnight, flying miles and miles. And they will eat the suet, which has a lot of fat in it. So there is orange flavored suet. There's oranges, very simple. You can just slice them in half. A lot of feeders will have these little spikes on them like this. So you can just stick those right on the feeder. People sometimes will just stick those on fences. We hear all kinds of things. So you can just put out some oranges. There's Nectar, and there's different types of Nectar feeders. You can get some kind of mixes you just add water to. We have pre-made Nectar, or you can make your own. The recipe for Oriole Nectar is 1 part sugar to 5 parts water. So you boil the water, add the sugar. That being said, if you're doing both Oriole and Hummingbird Nectar, you can just make up the Hummingbird Nectar, which is a little sweeter. It's 1 part sugar to 4 parts water, and you can put that in the Oriole feeder. They're not super picky. Some people say too that they seem to like the sweeter stuff. So you can make your own nectar. And then jelly. So this is the birdberry jelly. This is what they seem to really, really like. But yeah, I just want to stay away from anything that has any artificial sweeteners, corn syrup, that kind of a thing. So they love the jelly. That's the best thing you can put out for the Orioles. And then there's mealworms. So this is what the delicious mealworms look like. They come live or freeze-dried. And the live mealworms, what they are is a beetle larva. So if you get live mealworms, you want to store them in the refrigerator, which is kind of iffy for some people, which I totally understand. And what that does, it just delays their metamorphosis of becoming a beetle. So it just delays that process. So live mealworms are available. We also have freeze-dried mealworms that you can just put out. You could probably mash them in your jelly. I don't see why not. And you can also just spray them with a little bit of water. And that way they kind of suck up that water and they just look a little bit more alive. So those are mealworms. And then this is just a Baltimore Oriole here grabbing what looks like the tent caterpillars there, because they do eat a lot of those soft-bodied insects. So if you're doing any kind of butterfly gardening, hummingbird gardening to attract caterpillars, that's great for all these songbirds. Absolutely love caterpillars. Lots of different feeders are available for the Orioles. We have some, this is our bestseller here called the Oriole Fest on the right. That is our bestseller because it has a little chamber here for the nectar at the bottom. You can spear an orange on the little stick here in the middle, and then you can put jelly on the top. So that's our bestseller. But we've got a whole bunch of different feeders that provide them with all their favorite foods. But really something that
Yes, I have a
holds...
question
Oh,
on the
yeah.
last feeder because I was here and got one.
This one on the
Yeah,
left.
see where the jelly is, and then see where the hole is between the orange,
This
where they
here.
would go to the nectar.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do hummers go to that, or just the Orioles? Do we need to get those flowers and put them in?
You don't need to get the flowers. If you put the flowers in a feeder like this, so the main difference between an Oriole feeder and a hummingbird feeder that has nectar ports is going to be the nectar ports on the Oriole feeders are bigger because the Orioles have a bigger beak. Also, the Oriole feeders will have perches on them, and hummingbird feeders don't always have perches because the hummingbirds will just hover. So if you were to put flowers or some kind of, something like that on there, it just might make the hole too small for the Orioles to use.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, we
Okay.
hear stories about Orioles coming to hummingbird feeders, hummingbirds coming to Oriole feeders. So yeah, if they can get in there, they're not too picky about the feeder. Yeah.
Can they be in the sun or the shade? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter.
Feeders, though?
It doesn't matter too much. If you have them in the sun, you just might have to change them out more often. The nectar can go bad after 2-3 days or so, especially if it's in the sun. So you just want to make sure to change that out often. That being said, I'll show you a product we have that will keep the nectar fresh longer. It's called Nectar Defender. We do have something that'll keep it fresh for more like a week.
Last a long time.
It does last a long time. It's really nice. And the bottle lasts a long time too. It really
Yeah.
lasts all season. So, I keep mine out in the sun actually because the orange color can help bring the Orioles in. The red color can absolutely help bring the hummingbirds in. So I like to keep it out in the open so they can see it.
You can see it better too.
And I can see it better too. Yeah, it's a win-win.
Liz, can that Nectar Defender work for either Orioles or hummingbirds?
Yep, any kind of nectar. Yep. It doesn't do anything for the jelly or the oranges, but usually they go through the jelly so fast that it doesn't really go bad per se, and the oranges last for quite a while. So a bunch of different Oriole feeders here. This is a really popular one. It's a cute little flower, and it comes with a little cup, and the oranges just stake on the side. So lots of different options. Now, if you put out your Oriole feeder, you might get other visitors coming. This is what I usually get first thing before I see any Orioles. This is a gray catbird. And gray catbirds are pretty cool. They're also a migratory species, so they're coming back into the area. They're in the mimicking family, so they're related to mockingbirds and brown thrashers. So they will mimic the calls of other birds. And usually they do a long string of mimicking songs, and then they have a sound that kind of sounds like a cat's meow. So that's why they're called the catbird. But they love the jelly, so they will eat the jelly as well. And so will mockingbirds. So this is a mockingbird here. And sometimes people get them coming to their Oriole feeders also. And the mockingbirds are quite chatty, and they also mimic the calls of other birds, and they usually do them in a string of 3. So they'll repeat the song 3 times, move on to another song, repeat it 3 times. And the catbird just will repeat a song once. So one song, another song, and then a cat sound. So 2 different mimics. You might get.
Last year, I had to keep buying new cups for the holders
Okay.
because the cappers would empty it out, but the squirrels would actually take
The cups.
So
Gotcha.
this year, I moved all of them. I just moved everything around, and I just have them on all of the things that have the bullet.
Oh, the
on it, so
baffle.
squirrels
Mhm.
That's working great.
Oh, good. Yeah,
Just to
squirrels
let
will
everybody
sometimes. Squirrels are hit or miss with Oriole and hummingbird feeders. Sometimes they just leave them completely alone. Sometimes they'll go for the jelly or the oranges. So yeah, it can be a puzzle to kind of figure out how to keep them squirrel proof. But you might get other visitors too. Last year I had a cardinal randomly eating my jelly. House finches sometimes do it. Purple finches will go for it sometimes. Woodpeckers. So you might get a mix of different things eating the fruits and the jelly too, which is pretty fun.
Is that a cleaning your feeder question? If I
Oh, yeah.
haven't put my Oriole or hummingbird feeder out yet this year, clean it out first?
I would clean it out. Yeah. Mhm.
With
Yeah.
a vinegar solution or a bleach solution?
So you have very good timing because we just had our bird feeder cleaning event on Saturday, and we got 595 feeders in. So we've been knee deep in feeder cleaning. So I can absolutely answer this question for you. What we use is hot water does a lot of work for you all on its own. So we use hot water and Dawn dish soap.
Okay.
Let it soak for a while. That does most of the work.
Oh.
Scrub it. And then we do dip it in a light bleach solution. That's 1 part bleach to 10 parts water, and then rinse it off well. But people do use vinegar to clean off their feeders also.
Okay.
Yeah, white
you.
vinegar. Did you have a question also?
I did.
It's gone. I'll be here. It's fine.
I got so interested in what you said.
I have a question.
Oh,
I'm just
sure.
wondering about the grape jelly. Does it attract ants? Do you need to use an ant net?
Yes, I'll show you some different ways to keep them out. But yeah, the jelly and the nectar can attract insects. Absolutely, yeah.
I remember.
Sure.
How long does the birdberry jelly last?
Like out until it goes bad. You mean?
Yeah.
Usually it's good for at least a week. They tend to. My experience is they tend to eat it all before it goes bad. In the summer when it's really hot out, sometimes it gets a little liquidy, but you're good for usually about a week or so. So in general, with the Orioles, you want to make sure to get your feeders out early before you see or hear any Orioles. And now is the time to do that because they are just about to really make their appearance here in the upstate New York area. Stock up on jelly, especially if you're buying it from the grocery store because it always sells out. Add a weather guard, and I'll show you weather guards. They just help the jelly not get washed away. And then switch to mealworms later on in the season to try to keep them coming all year. So that's about the Orioles. And then we also have these lovely little migrants that several people have said that they've seen some already. This is the ruby-throated hummingbird. We have one species that is here on the east of the Mississippi. The male has that beautiful red throat, and then the female does not. So this is what they look like. And this is their range. So we only have the one species. If you go out west, they have a whole bunch of other species. So here, if you see,
with like a green around here.
we don't have one with a green. The back of them is quite green, but not on their throat per se. So this is the range. They're an eastern bird. They also are migratory, so they spend their winter in Central America. And what's really neat about their migration is that some of them, instead of going up kind of just going up through Mexico, a lot of them will fly over the Gulf of Mexico. So they will do that whole flight, which can be up to 500 miles nonstop. And it's an 18 to 24-hour flight. So they can do an incredibly long flight over the Gulf of Mexico, which is insane because they're such a small bird. And there is another species that every once in a while is seen on the East Coast. There's some birds that are expanding their ranges. So we have some here, like the Carolina wren. Cardinals are expanding their ranges more northward. So we do have several different species that are doing this, and they just do this naturally. And the rufous hummingbird is one on the West Coast that is expanding its range as well over time. And so every once in a while, there's sightings of rufous hummingbirds on the East Coast. So if you see something that looks a little screwy, it doesn't look like it's most likely a ruby-throated hummingbird, but snap a picture because you never know. You might just have yourself a rufous hummingbird because they are starting to expand their ranges, and they're sometimes seen on the East Coast. So I like to mention them as well. Hummingbirds are found in old fields, forest edges, meadows, orchards. They like streams. They like to be around water and backyards. And when they are in their overwintering, when they're down in Central America, they like dry forests, citrus groves, scrubs. So another kind of common habitat that we have around here. This is the little hummingbird nest. It's about the size of a thimble when it first gets made. It starts to stretch as the young grow, but they will build their nest on a small, slender branch, usually overlooking water if possible. And the nest they make out of thistle or dandelion down, so it's very, very soft, and they'll use spider silk to kind of weave it together. And then they also tend to put lichen on the outside of it. So that greenish fungus kind of stuff that grows on trees, they'll put that on the outside to help camouflage it. So you can see that better here in this photo. There's some little babies. So first, when the eggs are hatched, the eggs are super, super small. And then as the young hatch and as they start to grow, they start to kind of push the nest out and make the nest a little bit bigger. The hummingbird clutch size is 1 to 3 eggs. It's usually 2. They usually have 2 eggs. They'll have 1 to 2 broods a year. And the size of the eggs are only about a half an inch long. So they're very, very small. And they don't take very long to grow up. The incubation rate is 12 to 14 days. So the female will sit on the nest for a couple weeks. And then after about 3 weeks, the nestling period is 18 to 22 days. Those little hummingbirds are out in the world. So they also, not only do hummingbirds come to feeders, but they love tubular flowers. So what we find is hummingbirds seem to come to people's feeders early in the season when there's not a ton of flowers in bloom yet. And then as the season goes on, they kind of switch more to flowers. So having a mix of tubular flowers and nectar feeders is the best way to keep them coming. They like things like trumpet creeper. They like cardinal flower is the thing that they seem to like the most in my yard, which is a native. Trumpet honeysuckle, jewelweed, bee balm. There's all kinds of hummingbird plants. Anything bright red and tubular is in general a really good hummingbird plant. They also eat insects too, and I think I've got a picture. They're known to eat small insects. They'll eat spiders. They'll pick spiders off of those spider webs when they're grabbing their nesting material of spider silk. They eat fruit flies. We do have a hummingbird feeder that attracts fruit flies. They call it a hummingbird protein feeder. And the hummingbirds do eat small insects as well. So they don't just drink nectar, but they eat insects.
So those I bought ones, I haven't put up yet. They may bring it back now. Do they really work?
They really work to attract the fruit flies. Yeah.
Wow.
I can tell you that much. They definitely do.
Good. Do this, right? Well,
They should. So it's just like any other kind of feeder. They will it attract the birds 100%? It's hard to say. But if you have a mix of the nectar feeder and the fruit fly feeder, it gives them kind of a couple different options. So I put it out later. I do nectar feeders early in the season, and then I kind of switch to the fruit fly one once they're coming to a bunch of the flowers in my yard anyway. So I kind of mix it up that way. So I've yet to see them fly around and pick off the insects, but we've got videos of them doing it. So they do it. It's just whether or not you catch them at the right time. And hummingbirds have really long tongues too. So you can kind of see one sticking out its little tongue there. They are quite long. So that's how they can feed from those long tubular flowers. They can just stick their tongue in, grab the nectar. And they do have specialized tongues. They have little barbs on them where they can suck up the nectar. So pretty cool little birds.
Liz, how high do you have to fill, the round,
Oh, the dishes.
the round, they sort of
Yeah.
look like that, but they're not very deep.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Okay,
how
hummingbird feeder.
high, well, John and I had a little disagreement about this, but he said, well, their tanks are long enough, you don't have to put a lot in.
Yeah.
But I go to the line, but he doesn't think it needs to be that far in because of their tongues.
Mm-hmm.
How full do you have to
It's up to you. You don't have to fill them all the way, especially if you've got one that holds quite a bit of nectar, like
I
something
have that.
like
Yeah.
this, which holds quite a bit. You could even fill it like halfway because we only have the one species here. Like if you see videos online of like this picture here where there's a feeder just being inundated by hummingbirds, that is like 99 times out of 100 going to be a feeder that's from somewhere on the West Coast where they have multiple species and they're in, a migratory pathway, and the hummingbirds are all migrating through and they're super hungry. So you're not going to see anything like this at your feeders around here, unfortunately. So you don't need to feed them all the way. And yeah, they can reach in pretty deep. So with those little dish feeders, yeah, if you just fill them up, halfway or so, you're fine. So as far as your hummingbird feeder setup goes, the color red does help. They are attracted to the color red, but you don't need to put red dye in your nectar. It's just not known if the dye can harm the hummingbirds in any way. So they don't need it. So you don't need to dye the nectar, but having a red feeder absolutely helps. Now, hummingbirds are territorial. So again, that's another reason why you won't see something like this in your backyard. They like to scare away other birds. So we say, keep your feeders separate from other feeders. Not only are hummingbirds territorial against each other, but they'll scare away larger birds. If you've got a bird feeder set up with multiple feeders on it, say you've got your peanut feeder and your Niger feeder and sunflower feeder, and you add a hummingbird feeder to that, they're known to chase away not only things like goldfinches and chickadees, but they'll go after blue jays. They're really territorial. These little itty bitty things. Yeah, they're small but mighty. Yeah. They chase each other away. Yeah. So if you want to have a lot of hummingbirds, the best thing you can do is get multiple feeders. You can get multiple small feeders because again, we only have the one species, and put them in different places in your yard that they can't see one another. So that's the best way to get multiple hummingbirds because They are very territorial.
So funny.
So a lot of the feeders are red. And around here, a little feeder like this, if you do multiple feeders like that, little ones, that's all you need, because we just do have the one species. Because they are quite bold, they do come to windows. We do have window hummingbird feeders as well. And hummingbirds are great because you can put their feeders just about anywhere. We always recommend having them up a few feet or so, just in case there's neighborhood cats or anything like that could easily jump up and snatch them off of the feeder. But they naturally feed from plants that are down low. So they'll feed from things that are really low, feed from things really high. So you can even have little hooks like this in planter boxes or throughout the garden to attract the hummingbirds. And you want to make sure to keep the feeder clean. There are different brushes you can get, especially these little brushes here that are just like little pipe cleaner things, basically. One way to keep those ports clean. So you want to make sure to keep that feeder clean. This is the recipe for Hummingbird Nectar, 1 part sugar, 4 parts water. You just boil the water, add the sugar, mix it up, let it cool. We also have ready to use nectar. I use this stuff because I don't know if it makes a difference, but they seem to really like it. It has wildflower infusions, whatever that means, but it seems to work. They seem to like it more than more than just sugar water. And this is a local company too. They're just outside of Syracuse, so I like to support them too. They're called Sweet Seed. They'll be here in a couple weeks to do a promotion too. But we've got powders and things you can just add water to also. And then, so I was talking about that the protein, quote unquote, protein feeder. Here it is. It's this thing right here. Look at all those hummingbirds enjoying it. Now, that could be photoshopped, honestly, but there are videos showing them using it. So what this kind of crazy red structure is, it looks like a circus tent. It's inside of it, the lid lifts off, and inside you put banana peels. You could put other fruit in there too, I suppose. Those banana peels are what attracts fruit flies. They'll lay their eggs in there and attract more fruit flies. So then the fruit flies just kind of hang out. There's little slits in here. The fruit flies will just hang out around the outside of the feeder. The red color attracts the hummingbirds, brings the hummingbirds in, and they'll just pick off the little fruit flies off of the feeder. So that's something a little different if you don't want to have to change the nectar all the time. And that's what I switched to later on in the season when I'm not seeing anything coming to my nectar feeder anymore. They're going to my plants. I put out my little protein feeder there, my fruit fly feeder. And then moving water also attracts them. So they will sometimes come to bird baths, but usually bird baths are a little too deep for them. And they do like moving water. There's things called misters you can attract, or you can attach to your hose that have just a little mist that they absolutely love and they'll fly through. Or you can make any bird bath a little moving water feature with something like this. This is a solar water insert, and there's a solar panel on the top here. And when the sun hits it, there's a pump in the inside, and it'll just recirculate the water and turn it into a little fountain. And hummingbirds will fly up and they'll drink from the moving water. So that's another way. Songbirds in general love the moving water. So that's a good way not only to get the hummingbirds, but people tend to get warblers this time of the year coming to the water. Scarlet tanagers are another migrant that'll sometimes come to the moving water, because not all birds will come to a feeder or come to a house to nest, but they all need some kind of water source. So. Then there's also nesting material you can put out, things like this. This is to mimic some of that natural nesting material that they'll use to build their nest. We have these things too. These are called hummingbird nesting perches. They're a fairly new item, so we haven't heard totally if they work. It's kind of hit or miss, just like other things. It's a little perch here with an indentation, and they are supposed to weave their nest in here. So I'm not sure how well they work yet, but we'll let you know once we know more. But those are also available to try to attract them. And then these are really popular in the middle here. This is a hummingbird swing. And these look really goofy, but they do use them because they are so territorial. People hang these up kind of by their feeders or in a place where the hummingbirds can perch on it and oversee their territory, and they will use them. So they like to kind of sit in an open spot so they can survey their habitat, survey their space. And if they see another bird come by their nectar source, they tend to defend it and they'll chase the other bird away. So Those people really find those fun. These are called hummingbird swings, so we've got those. And then there's accessories. So with feeding nectar and jelly can attract different things that you don't necessarily want. Some Oriole feeders especially come with built-in weather guards, and these are really nice. Something like this. The idea with weather guards, especially on Oriole feeders, is they help keep the jelly from getting washed away when it rains. So you can add weather guards, and a lot of people do. If they don't get one to begin with, they usually end up coming back and adding one. We've got orange ones for the Orioles. We have red ones for hummingbird feeders if you want them for hummingbird feeders. But the weather guards do help keep the jelly from washing out, going on the ground. And then this, I would almost say, is a must-have with your hummingbird feeder. This is called an ant moat, and these are good for both hummingbird and Oriole feeders. They're super simple, and what they are, they're just little cups that you add water to. And the idea here is you hang your feeder from the water cup, and the ants can't get around the water to get down to the feeder. So it's just a super simple way to keep ants from going to your feeders. And what's nice about the little cups, I've got this little clear cup here on my feeder, and the goldfinches really love it. They use it as a little bird bath. So there's something about it that the goldfinches specifically love. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1. And then this is the stuff that will keep the nectar fresh longer. This is called Feeder Fresh Nectar Defender. You just add a little bit of this liquid to your nectar, and it helps keep it fresh for more like a week or 10 days instead of just 2 or 4 days.
Even when it's really hot.
Even when it's really hot.
It's really hot.
And then this is something else that we have that is an all-natural ant repellent, which has been super popular. It smells like cinnamons and clove, and the ants don't like that. It's a gel. And if you've got your feeder on a little pole or anything like that, you just put a little line of the gel around the pole like this, and the ants won't go across it. So they just don't like this. There's something that repels them from that smell. So this is a super popular product. People love that.
Does the rain wash that off your pole?
It does. You have to reapply it here and there. Yeah, you do. And then there's nectar guards. So this is an example of nectar guards, of Oriole nectar guards on that one Oriole Fest feeder. So there are these little rubber tips, and a lot of Oriole feeders and hummingbird feeders, especially those dish styles, if you pop open the dish, they the nectar ports kind of poke down, and there are these little rubber tips that you can attach to the inside of those of the nectar ports to keep bees and wasps out. So the idea with these are that, and I can show you in person on a feeder to maybe explain them better, but the birds can poke through the little rubber tips with their beaks, but the bees and wasps can't. So it's one way to keep them out of the feeder. And the bees and wasps are tough because you'll always kind of have them around, especially as the season goes on. They're not bad right now, but the longer the season goes on, the hives get bigger and bigger, and there's more of them out there. So they're always going to be around. We do have some things that help kind of keep them away. We've got fake bald-faced hornets nests you can hang in the area to kind of keep them away. There's different things you can do, but having nectar guard tips can absolutely help. So as far as the hummingbirds go, keep finding one that's easy to clean is great because that nectar can go bad after a few days. So you want to make sure to always keep the feeder clean. Keep your feeder away from the other ones as far as the hummingbirds go because they don't really play nicely with others. Keep the nectar fresh. Skip the food coloring. You don't need food coloring in your nectar. Get the ant moat because then you don't get, if you don't have the ant moat, the ants will not only get inside and feed from the feeder, but you'll find them like floating in there too, and it gets really gross. And the color red helps as far as picking out the feeder. The color red absolutely helps.
And throughout the year, how often do you clean them?
Throughout the summer.
Season? Yeah.
Most of the time with the Oriole feeders, almost every time I refill it, maybe every other time, I bring it in the house and run some hot water over it just because it gets kind of sticky and yeah. So I clean those off pretty often.
And you don't have to dunk it in the hot water in the dawn.
Not every time. Not every time. Just kind of keep an eye on it. If the feeding ports, especially if they start getting black or anything like that, that's mold. So you want, then I would absolutely clean it with the Dawn dish soap and everything.
You can buy duplicate dishes to fit in them. I got duplicate dishes and I filled the clean ones up, put them out and swap them out. And this way I'm not cleaning as well as filling and trying to get it out.
You're a busy woman.
Yeah, you can absolutely. We've got replacement dishes. So if you have an Oriole feeder, say something like this that has glass cups, or if you've got something like this, we do sell just the replacement dishes. So yeah, you can easily just swap them out.
Those are the ones the squirrels run away with.
Oh, they're light. Yeah. So you might want something with maybe a glass dish or something like that.
Well, I just moved them to.
And those will fit in the other feeders, I found.
Oh, some of them, yeah, we've got different feeders that those cups, yeah, the cups, sometimes they do fit in other feeders as well, which is nice. Yeah, did you?
I have a question. If I have a hook and I wanted to put a hummingbird feeder on
Mhm.
one side and the Baltimore Oriole
Yeah.
feeder on the other side, that's gonna be okay? Will the hummingbirds not, should I try to do a single hook?
It can't hurt to start to see if it works. I'd keep an eye on it because the hummingbirds might start scaring the Orioles away, would be the only, yeah.
I've yet to see an Oriole, so.
Oh, okay, all right, so it's a good starting point, yeah. Mhm. Did you have a question?
You got maybe 3 or 4 feeders
Uh-huh.
in our yard. How far apart should that feeder be for the Orioles?
For the Orioles or for the hummingbirds? I'd keep it about 10 feet away if possible, yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
I've had great luck with getting a mandevilla plant.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that.
You'll see them in the garden centers pretty soon. And it's, well, they come pink, white, or red. I
Mhm.
had a red one, and it's wonderful as far as attracting the hummingbirds.
What's the name of
How do
it?
you spell it?
Mandevilla.
Mandevilla plant.
Is that the one that has,
Ooh.
it looks almost like a trumpeter plant with a,
It's a tubular thing, so
yes, I had one on my patio. The hummers never came to my feeder. They always went to the flower. They're very good for attracting.